There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from peace. It's the silence that settles in after laughter, but not yours. The kind that wraps around your chair at the dinner table, around your plate, around your throat. The kind of silence that grows when everyone talks around you, but not to you. And when you finally speak, they blink, as if surprised you remembered how. That's the kind of silence I lived with for months. My name is Margaret. I'm 73 years old. I was married to Harold for 49 of those years. We built a home, raised a son, Daniel, and when Harold died, I was left with more memories than I knew what to do with. The house felt too big, too empty, too haunted by Harold's laugh, his mug on the kitchen counter, his tools still lined up in the garage like he might come back for them. So when Daniel suggested I move in with him and his wife, Sabrina, I didn't hesitate. "You'll be with family," he said. No reason to be alone in that big old house. I sold the place reluctantly, packed up what I could, gave away Harold's tool bench to the neighbor boy who used to mow our lawn, boxed up my wedding dishes, carried a few worn photo albums and the quilt my mother made me when I was 20, and I moved into their guest room. That's what they called it. Anyway, the guest room, never your room. Never grandma's space, just a neutral, generic space, tucked at the far end of the hallway, next to the laundry closet. The first few weeks were quiet. Sabrina kept herself busy with the kids, Emily and Ben, while Daniel worked late at the firm. I tried to stay out of the way. I cooked when I could, washed the dishes, ironed Daniel's shirts when I noticed they were wrinkled in the mornings. I didn't mind. That's what mothers do. But it didn't take long for things to change. It was in the little things first. Like the day I left my mug on the drying rack, only to find it mysteriously missing the next morning. I asked Sabrina if she'd seen it, and she smiled too brightly. "Oh, I just put it in the donation box. We're decluttering. We've got more mugs than we need, more mugs than we need." I didn't say anything, just nodded. Then came the bookshelf. I had brought 2 small boxes of my favorite novels, dog-eared and faded, but filled with my fingerprints. I placed them neatly on the bottom row of the living room shelf. A week later, they were gone, replaced by decorative candles and some hardback book with a gold cover and no title. "We're going for a more minimalist look," Sabrina said when I asked. "The books were a bit too vintage, you know?" She said it like vintage meant unwelcome. Daniel didn't say anything. He rubbed the back of his neck and gave me that awkward half smile he always used when he didn't want to pick a side. Still, I stayed quiet. I told myself I was overthinking, that I was still adjusting, that Sabrina was trying in her own way. But deep down, I felt it, like a slow leak in a balloon, the sense that I wasn't being embraced. I was being tolerated. I became careful about where I stepped. I asked before using the stove. I kept my music low in the mornings, and each time I did, I heard Harold's voice in my head. "You don't have to shrink to fit someone else's house, Margaret." But what if it's not just a house? What if it's your son's home? What if it's the only place you have left? One Sunday evening we had a family dinner. Sabrina made chicken piccata, her version, not quite how I used to make it. The kids were loud, elbows on the table, dropping their napkins every few minutes. Daniel was scrolling through his phone under the table. I waited for someone to ask me something. Anything. How my day was, whether I wanted more potatoes. If I remembered that funny trip we took to Yellowstone when Daniel was a boy. But nothing came. I sat quietly, cutting my chicken, trying not to notice how far the table felt from where I sat, even though I was right there. At one point, Sabrina made a joke about redecorating. "I told Daniel we need to turn the guest room into a proper office," she said, laughing. "I mean, no offense, But it's not like it's anyone's forever room, right? I blinked. Emily, bless her heart, looked over at me and whispered, "But that's Grandma's room." Sabrina waved her hand. "Well, sure, for now." And they laughed. Not cruelly, not loudly, but enough that something cracked. Later that night, after the dishes were washed and the kids were tucked into bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table, drinking the last of the tea. Sabrina and Daniel were watching something in the living room, laughing at a show I didn't recognize. I stood up, stretched my back, and said aloud, to no one in particular, "I'm going to head home." Daniel looked up. "You are home, Mom." "But Sabrina?" She laughed. She actually laughed. Not in a warm, "oh, silly grandma" kind of way, but in that dismissive, sharp way people laugh when they think you're confused. And she said, "You mean your room, or the whole house?" Then she smiled into her wine glass. I froze. For a second I thought maybe I was being too sensitive, but the sting in my chest told me no. I had heard her exactly right. "I mean home," I said, more firmly this time. Daniel chuckled. "Let's not get dramatic." I nodded slowly, walked down the hall, closed the door behind me, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to feel unwelcome in a place where you paid no rent, but paid in love. Years of it. I sat on the edge of the bed. No, the guest bed, and stared at the wall for a long time. That word wouldn't leave me. Home. I had sold my home, let go of my roots. For this. A guest room, a missing mug, a shelf with no room for my memories. I had given them everything. Quietly, lovingly. And now, I was being laughed at for thinking I belonged. That's when something inside me shifted. Not a rage. Not even a sadness. Something quiet, like a key turning in a lock. And I remembered something. Something very important. The house. This one I was living in. It wasn't entirely there. Not legally. Because when Daniel and Sabrina bought it, they couldn't qualify for the full mortgage alone. My name was on the deed. I paid the down payment from the sale of my house. I had the paperwork, the transaction records, the proof. They may have laughed, but this wasn't just their home. It was mine too. And if they couldn't make room for me at the table, I'd remind them whose table it was to begin with. The next morning, I started small. I took out one of the old mugs I had tucked away in my suitcase. Blue ceramic, chipped along the rim. The one Harold gave me for our 25th anniversary. I placed it on the kitchen counter next to the rest. A silent reminder that I too belonged in this space. No one said anything. Later that afternoon, when Sabrina was out with the kids, and Daniel was in his office on a video call, I quietly pulled out a single set of silverware from the drawer. One fork, one knife, one spoon. I polished them and placed them at the far end of the kitchen table. A place setting, a seat for me. When dinner came, I didn't ask what we were having. I simply brought my own plate from the guest room. My floral china wrapped carefully in bubble wrap when I moved. I placed it down in front of my seat. Daniel noticed. He raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. Sabrina, however, frowned. "You don't have to use your own dishes, Margaret. We have plenty." "I know," I said. "But this one's mine." A beat of silence. Then she turned back to the salad. That night, I made a list. It wasn't dramatic, just notes to myself. Reprint deed copies. Locate original house contract. Find a locksmith. Recommendation. Contact Carol. Carol had been my neighbor for 30 years before she moved to Florida. She was also a real estate attorney. Sharp, discreet, loyal. I found her number in an old address book, right between my cousin Helen and the dentist I hadn't seen in a decade. "Carol," I asked when she picked up, "I need your advice. And your confidentiality." The following week, I moved at my own pace. I reclaimed a drawer in the kitchen, the third one down, previously filled with loose pens and expired coupons. I lined it with contact paper and placed my recipes inside. Sabrina noticed and moved them back to the pantry. I moved them again. Daniel asked if everything was okay. I smiled. "I'm just settling in." He nodded, uneasy, like he felt something shifting but didn't know how to name it. Then came the towels. I washed all the guest towels, the ones they left in a basket outside my room, and folded them into squares. I replaced one with my own, a pale yellow towel with a small embroidered M in the corner. My mother had stitched it for me when I went off to college. When Sabrina saw it hanging in the hallway, she sighed. "You really should ask before redecorating." "It's a towel," I replied. "It's not the color scheme." And that's when I laughed. Softly, but with a weight behind it. Neither am I. That weekend, Daniel and Sabrina hosted a game night. Friends came over, the house filled with noise and wine glasses clinking, the scent of garlic knots drifting from the oven. I stayed mostly in my room, until I heard someone mention me. "She's Daniel's mom. She's staying with them for a while," someone said. A while. As if I were a layover, as if this was temporary. As if I had nowhere else to go. I stepped into the kitchen for some water. Conversations quieted. Smiles appeared. I didn't acknowledge them. I took my glass and walked outside, onto the patio. And there, under the soft twinkle lights, Sabrina had strung up last spring. I stood in the cool air and let myself feel it. This wasn't just about a bedroom. It was about space, place, dignity. Harold used to say, "Don't let anyone build a home around you and then treat you like furniture." That night, I sat down at the patio table, pulled out the deed copy I had printed from my files, and laid it on the table like a game piece. My name was there. Margaret Ann Hartley, co-owner. 47% equity. Co-signer. The house was not theirs, it was ours, and I was about to remind them. To be continued, in part 3. Harold would have noticed. Thank you for your patience. Here's part 2 of They Laughed When I Called It My Home. So I changed the locks. Part 2. 1 fork, 1 cup, 1 chair. The next morning, I started small. I took out one of the old mugs I had tucked away in my suitcase. Blue ceramic, chipped along the rim. The one Harold gave me for our 25th anniversary. I placed it on the kitchen counter next to the rest, a silent reminder that I too belonged in this space. No one said anything. Later that afternoon, when Sabrina was out with the kids, and Daniel was in his office on a video call, I quietly pulled out a single set of silverware from the drawer. 1 fork, 1 knife, 1 spoon. I polished them and placed them at the far end of the kitchen table, a place setting, a seat for me. When dinner came, I didn't ask what we were having. I simply brought my own plate from the guest room. My floral china, wrapped carefully in bubble wrap when I moved. I placed it down in front of my seat. Daniel noticed. He raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. Sabrina, however, frowned. "You don't have to use your own dishes, Margaret. We have plenty." "I know," I said. "But this one's mine." A beat of silence. Then she turned back to the salad. That night, I made a list. It wasn't dramatic, just notes to myself. Reprint deed copies. Locate original house contract. Find a locksmith recommendation. Contact Carol. Carol had been my neighbor for 30 years before she moved to Florida. She was also a real estate attorney. Sharp, discreet, loyal. I found her number in an old address book, right between my cousin Helen and the dentist I hadn't seen in a decade. "Carol?" I asked when she picked up. "I need your advice and your confidentiality." The following week, I moved at my own pace. I reclaimed a drawer in the kitchen, the third one down, previously filled with loose pens and expired coupons. I lined it with contact paper and placed my recipes inside. Sabrina noticed and moved them back to the pantry. I moved them again. Daniel asked if everything was okay. I smiled. "I'm just settling in." He nodded, uneasy, like he felt something shifting but didn't know how to name it. Then came the towels. I washed all the guest towels, the ones they left in a basket outside my room, and folded them into squares. I replaced one with my own, a pale yellow towel with a small embroidered M in the corner. My mother had stitched it for me when I went off to college. When Sabrina saw it hanging in the hallway, she sighed. "You really should ask before redecorating." "It's a towel," I replied. "It's not the color scheme." And that's when I laughed. Softly, but with a weight behind it. Neither am I. That weekend, Daniel and Sabrina hosted a game night. Friends came over, the house filled with noise and wine glasses clinking, the scent of garlic knots drifting from the oven. I stayed mostly in my room until I heard someone mention me. "She's Daniel's mom. She's staying with them for a while," someone said. A while, as if I were a layover. As if this was temporary. As if I had nowhere else to go. I stepped into the kitchen for some water. Conversations quieted. Smiles appeared. I didn't acknowledge them. I took my glass and walked outside, onto the patio. And there, under the soft twinkle lights, Sabrina had strung up last spring. I stood in the cool air and let myself feel it. This wasn't just about a bedroom. It was about space, place, dignity. Harold used to say, "Don't let anyone build a home around you and then treat you like furniture." That night, I sat down at the patio table, pulled out the deed copy I had printed from my files, and laid it on the table like a game piece. My name was there. Margaret Ann Hartley, co-owner, 47% equity, co-signer. The house was not theirs, it was ours, and I was about to remind them. I didn't sleep much that night. It wasn't restlessness or worry, it was clarity, like my mind was a lake that had finally gone still enough to see the bottom. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my old deed copy beside me on the nightstand, and thought Harold would have noticed long before now. He always had a way of sensing when something was off, when respect began to fray around the edges. He'd say, "Respect isn't lost all at once. It's misplaced piece by piece." That morning, I made a pot of coffee before anyone else was up. I sat at the table watching the steam rise, and waited. Eventually Daniel shuffled in. He rubbed the back of his neck and mumbled, "Morning." I nodded. "Sleep well?" He just grunted and poured himself a cup. We sat in silence, until I slid the manila envelope across the table. He glanced at it. "What's this?" "Proof," I said simply. He opened it. His eyes moved down the page slowly, pausing when he saw my name. The equity share. The notary stamp from 20 years ago. "You kept this?" he asked. I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't," he swallowed. "I thought everything transferred when Dad passed." "Not automatically," I said. "And not if you never filed a new deed. This house is still co-owned." He stared at the paper. "You mean, legally?" I nodded. "So you could..." "What?" "Kick us out." "I could," I said. "But I won't. Not yet." He looked up at me, face pale. "Then what is this about?" "This is about reminding you that I live here, Daniel, not as a guest, not as an obligation, but as someone who built this home alongside your father. This house doesn't belong to just you and Sabrina, and I won't be treated like an afterthought in a place I helped create." He didn't argue, because he knew I was right. That afternoon, I called Carol. She didn't sound surprised to hear from me. You said the locks, didn't you? She asked. I was wondering when that was coming. I chuckled. Not yet, but maybe soon. We set a time to meet later in the week. In the meantime, she emailed me a packet of paperwork. Guidelines on property rights, estate protection, and options for revising co-ownership structures. I printed them all, and I left them out on purpose. I watched as Sabrina picked them up from the kitchen counter that evening. Her face tightened. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. The silence stretched between us like elastic, ready to snap. That night, dinner was strained. The kids could feel it. They ate quietly, barely touching their peas. Daniel tried to make conversation about the neighbor's new fence. No one bit. Sabrina eventually said, "We should talk," I said. "We are." She narrowed her eyes. "I mean really talk, not leave papers out like threats." I looked up slowly. "They're not threats. They're facts," she sighed. "You've always needed to be in control." I smiled. "And you've always needed to pretend I'm not here." Daniel shifted in his seat. "Can we all just—" "No," I interrupted. "Let's finish this sentence." Sabrina leaned forward. "You want us to apologize for making space in our own home?" "Our home," I corrected. "And I want you to stop pretending that hospitality is the same as ownership." She scoffed. "We pay the mortgage, and I signed the loan." The table went still. Sabrina blinked. "You mean you're still on it?" I nodded. "Never removed. Harold and I put our names on it together. And I've been making quiet payments ever since. Whether you noticed or not." Daniel looked stunned. "You helped with the mortgage?" "I've been helping with a lot of things, Daniel. Just because you weren't paying attention doesn't mean I wasn't there." No one said a word. Eventually I stood and began clearing the dishes. And for once, no one offered to help. That night I moved one more item out of the guest room. My rocking chair. The one Harold gave me after we found out I was pregnant with Daniel. I placed it in the living room right in the corner by the window. It creaked slightly as I lowered myself into it. But that creak felt like a heartbeat. Like the bones of the house welcoming me back. Sabrina walked past and paused. "That chair doesn't really go with the decor." I looked out the window. It wasn't meant to. 2 days later, Carol came by. She stepped into the kitchen like a woman on a mission, shoulder bag over one arm, glasses perched low on her nose, and a manila folder that looked like it could rewrite history. Sabrina froze when she saw her. "Who's this?" she asked. Carol smiled. "I'm Margaret's legal counsel and her friend." Sabrina blinked. "Legal?" Carol placed the folder gently on the table. "We're updating some paperwork. Property declarations. Legal notifications. Nothing personal." "Oh, it's personal." Sabrina snapped. Carol just smiled again. "It always is." Later that evening, after Carol left, Daniel sat down beside me on the porch. "I'm not sure how to feel," he admitted. "Start with honesty," I said. "Then move to respect." He looked at the lawn, then back at me. "I didn't know you were still on the mortgage." "That's the problem," I said quietly. "You didn't know, you didn't ask." He exhaled. "So what now?" I turned to him. "Now," I said, "you treat me like I live here." "Because I do. And if that's too much to ask, then we can have a very different kind of conversation." His face fell, but he nodded. And for once, I believed him. The morning after Carol left, I stood in front of the narrow hall closet, the one with the peeling brass handle and the smell of old cedar. I hadn't opened it in months. But I knew what I was looking for. I reached for the ceramic dish on the top shelf, the one that used to hold Harold's loose change and scraps of paper. It also held a key, small, old, and slightly tarnished. Harold made it for me when we first moved in. A spare for the basement storage unit. It was the kind of key that belonged to memory, not modern doors. And yet, when I held it in my palm that morning, it felt heavier than it should have, as if it knew it had work to do. I slipped it into my pocket and waited. I didn't have to wait long. That afternoon, Sabrina announced she was taking the kids to the indoor play gym, and Daniel was headed to a client meeting. The house emptied. The silence settled in like it had been waiting too. I walked down the basement steps slowly. The padlock on the storage room door glinted at me, new, sturdy, and out of place. Above it, a label I hadn't seen before. Daniel's handwriting, bold in black marker. Private storage. Do not enter. I pulled the key from my pocket. It slid into the lock like it had never left. Click. Inside, the light flickered to life with a pull of the chain, and what I saw stole the breath from my lungs. They hadn't gotten rid of anything. Not the wooden chest Harold built in '87. Not the lace curtains I'd made by hand. Not the quilt my mother embroidered before her hands gave out. Everything was there, covered in plastic or draped in sheets. My rocking chair, my recipe box, the porcelain doll Daniel had begged for as a child, now stuffed behind a bin of tangled Christmas lights. They hadn't donated my belongings. They had buried them, packed away my life like clutter, like trash. They didn't have the nerve to throw away. I stood in the room for a long time, breathing in dust and lavender. Then I reached for the quilt first. I carried it upstairs and draped it over the back of the couch. The fabric was faded, but the weight of it felt like home. Next came my blue and white china. I washed every plate, every cup, polished them until they gleamed. I removed the mismatched mugs from the kitchen shelves, the novelty ones with slogans like "One Dad" and "But First Coffee," and replaced them with porcelain that had history. And then the chair, the green velvet armchair that Harold gave me on our 25th anniversary, the one I sat in when I nursed Daniel, when I read him bedtime stories, when I waited up, praying for him to come home safe from his first solo drive. It took me 20 minutes to get it up the stair, but I did. I placed it in the corner of the living room, facing the front window, where it always belonged. Sabrina was the first to see the change. She walked in with a bag of groceries on her hip and stopped cold in the doorway. "What is all this?" I looked up from my tea, my thing, from the basement. "You went into the storage room?" I nodded. "Harold's key still works." She opened her mouth like she had something to say. Something sharp, probably, but she closed. Her eyes swept across the room. The quilt, the chair, the china peeking from the cabinet. "This isn't just your house," she muttered. I raised an eyebrow. "I didn't say it wasn't yours. I said it's mine too." She said nothing more, just turned and went upstairs. Later that night, Daniel cornered me in the hallway. "Mom, I understand you're upset, but pulling things out like this, it feels hostile." "Does it?" I asked. "It felt like home to me." "You could have talked to us first." I laughed. Quiet, bitter. "Talk to you?" "Like when you moved me into the laundry room, without a word. When you locked up my belongings like they were junk." He rubbed his face. "It wasn't like that." "No," I said. "It was worse. It was pretending I didn't exist." He looked genuinely stung. "I didn't mean it like that," he said. "Maybe not," I replied. But the result was the same. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked the question I'd been waiting for. "What are you trying to do?" I looked him in the eye. "I'm not trying to do anything, Daniel. I'm just taking up space again. The space that's always been mine." That weekend I took it a step further. I brought my sewing machine back upstairs and placed it near the window in the breakfast nook, the one spot with the best morning light. I opened my recipe book and began planning Sunday dinner. My Sunday dinner: a roast, cornbread, and the sweet potato pie Daniel used to beg for on his birthday. I even ironed the linen tablecloth, the one that came from Harold's mother, passed down like a prayer. When the family sat down that Sunday, Sabrina frowned. This isn't how we usually do it. I served the roast. Well, maybe usual needs rethinking. After dinner, the kids helped me clear the table, without being asked, without a word from their parents, just quietly, respectful, like they could feel something shifting. When I sat down in my armchair with a cup of peppermint tea, I looked around, and for the first time in years, the house felt balanced. Still fragile maybe, but no longer broken. I heard whispering from the kitchen, Sabrina's voice, low and urgent. But what if she kicks us out, Daniel? She wouldn't do that, would she? Silence. I smiled into my teacup. I wasn't planning to, but it felt nice to be feared. Just a little, after so long being ignored. The locksmith arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. He was a tall man named Curtis, with salt and pepper hair, and a quiet kind of professionalism. Didn't ask questions, just took one look at the old brass doorknobs, nodded and said, "Looks like you're ready for an upgrade." I offered him coffee. He declined politely, and got to work. I stayed nearby, pretending to read the newspaper at the kitchen table while he made his way around the house. With every soft click of his tools, I felt a shift. Not just in the hardware of the doors, but in the emotional wiring of the home itself. This house had always been mine, but now it would finally acknowledge it. Out loud. In steel. Curtis finished by mid-afternoon. "Every exterior door is rekeyed," he said. "No one can use the old keys anymore. And here's the new set, just for you." He handed me 3 identical silver keys in a small envelope. I tucked one into the drawer next to the oven, another into my purse, and the last into the hollow of an old ceramic owl on the porch that no one ever looked inside. I paid Curtis in cash and walked him to the door. He turned back just before stepping off the porch. "Take care of yourself, ma'am," he said, almost knowingly. I nodded. "I finally am." Daniel came home that evening, jingling his keyring like he always did. He gave the door a twist, then stopped. I could hear it from the kitchen, the dull clunk of the lock refusing him. "Mom," he called through the door. I walked over slowly and opened it just enough to see his face. "What happened to the lock?" he asked, holding his key in the air like it was a question itself. "I had it changed." His brow furrowed. Without telling me, I stepped aside so he could come in. He did, slowly, confused, a little stunned. "You really changed all the locks?" "Yes." "Why?" I turned to face him fully. "Because it's my house, and because I don't want people walking into it with keys they think they're entitled to." He rubbed the back of his neck. "You could have said something." "I did. You just didn't listen. Changing the locks was me making sure I didn't get talked out of my own boundaries." He stood in silence for a long beat. Then, "Sabrina's not going to take this well." "I imagine not," I said calmly. "But I no longer measure the rightness of my actions by how well Sabrina sleeps at night." He didn't respond to that. He just looked around the house, really looked, and I could see it in his eyes. Something had shifted. Sabrina's reaction came the next morning. I was out back watering the planters when she pulled up. I could hear her storm up the steps, the front door slamming open. Then nothing. No footsteps, just a pause. Then she came marching around the side of the house, her heels clacking against the pavement like a warning bell. "You changed the locks," she said, almost laughing. "Seriously, Margaret?" "Yes," I said, not pausing my watering. "I did." She folded her arms. "That's extreme. You're punishing us." I looked at her, really looked. "I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. You've made everything so tense, so cold." "No," I said. "I just stopped pretending that warmth was the same as respect." She blinked, and for a moment I thought she might say something soft. human. Instead, she turned on her heel and said, "This isn't over." I didn't say anything. But inside, I thought, it is for me. That night, the house felt quieter, not empty, not lonely, peaceful. There was no knocking, no arguing, no tension sliding under doors. I made myself tea in my favorite mug, the one I hadn't seen in months because Sabrina stuffed it in the back of the cabinet. I sat in my reclaimed armchair, pulled Harold's quilt over my lap, and watched the fire flicker. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone to knock on my bedroom door and ask for something. I wasn't worried that my space might disappear by morning. The locks were changed, but so was I. It was a plain sheet of paper, nothing fancy, just a grocery list, really. But it told a story that no one else in the house seemed to read. I had taped it to the fridge one morning, right after changing the locks, scribbled in black ink with my usual loops and underlines. The list read, coffee, the kind I like, eggs, laundry detergent, not the lavender one, cinnamon. 1 week of peace, that last one made me chuckle when I wrote it. But it wasn't a joke, not really. I left the list where everyone could see it, like a flag planted in neutral ground. A quiet declaration. I live here. I have needs. I take up space. Daniel passed by it twice that morning without comment. Sabrina, however, was another story. She came into the kitchen around noon, opened the fridge, and stared at the list as if it had personally offended her. "You need coffee?" she asked, voice tinged with sarcasm. "Yes," I replied, folding laundry at the table. "The dark roast, the one in the brown bag." She didn't respond, just shut the fridge a little harder than necessary. But I noticed that when she came home later that day, there was a brown paper bag on the counter. The right kind, still unopened. I thought maybe, just maybe, this small gesture meant we were turning a corner, that there might still be a path toward peace, even if it was narrow. But by Thursday, the undercurrent was back. I heard it in the way Sabrina sighed when I asked the kids to lower the TV. I saw it in the way Daniel avoided eye contact during dinner. The tension wasn't gone. It had just slipped into quieter places. That night, I sat in the living room, reading a paperback novel I'd been trying to finish for months. The kids were already in bed, and Daniel was upstairs. Sabrina walked in, grabbed a blanket, and paused at the doorway. "You know," she said, "you're acting like a martyr, but all you've done is make things harder for everyone." I lowered my book. "I'm not trying to make anything harder," I said. "I'm just trying to stop disappearing." She rolled her eyes. "You've had a roof over your head, meals on the table." "Meals I cooked," I interrupted. "A roof I paid for. That wasn't charity, that was home, mine." Sabrina shook her head. "You're rewriting history." "No," I said calmly. "I'm finally writing my side of it." She didn't respond, just turned and walked out, muttering something under her breath. I chose not to hear. The next morning, the cinnamon was gone from the list, crossed off neatly. I found a small jar of it sitting on the counter, that small, oddly specific kindness. Like a breadcrumb dropped on a path that still led nowhere. Later that day, I heard Daniel talking on the phone in the den. His voice was low but tense. "No, she won't budge," he said. "I think she's serious. She's different now." I didn't need to hear the rest. He was talking about me. I took a walk that afternoon. The sky was pale and the trees were just beginning to hint at fall. I walked past houses that looked like families lived in them. Pumpkins on porches, chalk drawings on driveways, Dog toys scattered across lawns. At the corner, I ran into Martha from the library. She looked surprised to see me. "Still at Daniel's?" she asked. I nodded. Her face softened. "You look steadier." It was a kind thing to say. It stayed with me the whole walk back. That evening, I updated the list. Coffee, done. Cinnamon, done. Eggs, laundry detergent. Still not lavender. 1 week of peace. A room with a door that closes and locks. I left it up. I wanted them to see it. Daniel read it first. I saw him glance at it while pouring juice. His jaw tightened slightly, but he said nothing, just folded the juice carton neatly and placed it in the recycling bin. That was his way, polite, controlled, avoidant. But that night he knocked on my door. "I think it might be time we sat down," he said. I nodded and followed him to the kitchen. We sat at the table, him, me, and Sabrina, who already looked defensive. Arms crossed, lips pressed. "Mom," Daniel began, "we get that you want space. We get that this has been hard." I stayed silent. "But don't you think you're being a little extreme? The locks, the trust. Now the list on the fridge. The list is how I keep track of what I need," I said. "Something I didn't do for too long." "You're living in our house," Sabrina snapped. My gaze turned slowly to her. "I'm living in my house," I corrected. "A house you asked me to move into. A house I paid for, maintained, and cared for while you both treated me like a tenant in my own kitchen." "That's not fair," Daniel said, though his tone lacked conviction. "What's not fair," I said quietly, "is how easy it was for both of you to forget who helped you build this home in the first place." Silence, the kind that sits between people like a glass wall. Then Sabrina said, "So what? You want us to leave?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood and went to the fridge. I pulled the list down, folded it neatly, and said, "I want to live in a home that sees me. If that can happen with you here, then good. If it can't, I'll make the space for myself." I left the folded list on the counter and walked back to my room. And for once, I didn't wait for anyone to follow. The days that followed were strangely still. No one brought up the list. No one brought up the trust. Not even the locks. It was the kind of silence that wasn't peace. It was strategy. A holding pattern. Like everyone was waiting to see who would make the next move. But I had already made mine. And I wasn't going to be the one to blink. One morning I was pouring myself a cup of coffee when I noticed the hallway closet was open. It used to be my linen closet. I had stored spare towels, sheets, old quilts folded lovingly by hand. I hadn't opened it in months. Now there were bins labeled seasonal and crafts, plastic and personal, stackable, like someone had tried to organize me out of existence. I closed the door gently, then walked back to the fridge. I wrote a new note beneath the last item on the list, the one about the room with a door that locks. I added, "Remember the linen closet." That night, Daniel knocked on my door. He was holding a glass of wine, not for me, just for himself. His way of signaling he wanted to talk, but also wanted control over the tempo. "Can I sit?" he asked. I nodded. He settled into the chair opposite me, took a sip, then set the glass down with a soft clink. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the way things have felt lately." So had I. He rubbed his chin. "It's not what we wanted, you know." Having all this tension, I didn't respond. I wanted to see where he was going. He looked down. We had plans, Mom. Sabrina and I. When we moved in, it wasn't forever. We were saving. Trying to get stable. And yes, we got comfortable. Too comfortable, maybe. I arched an eyebrow. He caught it. I know what we did. The way we treated you. It wasn't right. His voice dropped. But I need you to understand. Things are tight. With the kids, the economy, the rent market. We're stuck. I folded my hands. You're not stuck. You're scared. There's a difference, he blinked. And being scared doesn't entitle you to someone else's boundaries. I added. He nodded slowly. Sabrina's talking about moving in with her sister. Just until things settle. I exhaled through my nose. That might be for the best. He seemed surprised. You'd be okay with that? I'd be okay with breathing freely in my own home. That's what I'd be okay with. A long pause. Then he stood, glass in hand, and said quietly, I never wanted it to come to this. Neither did I. The next morning I walked into the kitchen and found the list gone, taken down. In its place was a sticky note. 3 words, scribbled in Daniel's handwriting. We hear you, but hearing and understanding aren't the same. That evening I walked past the laundry room. The room they had offered me months ago. It still had the makeshift cot in the corner. The pillow was flattened. A stack of towels rested beside it, like a token apology. On the wall, the old metal shelves rattled slightly from the hum of the dryer. I stood in the doorway for a long time, remembering what it felt like to be offered that room. Not as a joke, not as punishment, but as something worse, a solution. They'd said it was temporary, said they just needed a little space, but what they really needed was someone to make smaller, so they could stretch out. And for a time, I let them. I let them treat my presence as optional, my dignity as flexible, my comfort as inconvenient. I stepped inside the room, ran a finger along the shelf, picked up the pillow, pressed it gently. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I sat down on the cot. It groaned under my weight. The springs whined. The light above flickered once, then settled. I looked around that cramped windowless room and whispered to myself, never again. I stood, smoothed my skirt, and left the door ajar. Sabrina left 2 days later. She didn't make a scene, just packed quietly, gave the kids some story about visiting Aunt Melissa, and left without saying goodbye to me. Daniel stayed, and the house felt half-shifted, like it was on its way to becoming a home again, but hadn't arrived yet. That night, Daniel came into the kitchen as I was preparing dinner. He offered to set the table. I let him. We ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was cautious, like strangers learning to speak the same language again. After we ate, I handed him a folded paper. What's this? He asked. A new house agreement, just between us. He opened it, read silently. No rights of inheritance, no assumptions of transfer. My room was mine, my rules mine. Respect required, presence acknowledged. He didn't argue. Instead, he said, do I sign now? I shook my head. Not tonight. Sleep on it. He smiled faintly. You're not mad? I looked at him, long and steady. I'm tired of being mad. This isn't about anger. It's about ownership, of self, of space, of history. He folded the paper carefully. Okay, and that was enough. That night, I passed the fridge on my way to bed. I paused, taped a new list to the door. Coffee dark roast. Cinnamon. Check. Peace earned. A door that closes. A home that remembers. One dinner without apology. Then I turned off the kitchen light and let the house exhale. The following Saturday, I woke up to a strange sensation. Quiet joy, not the giddy kind that dances on your skin. The quieter sort, the kind that stretches across the chest, like sunlight on a living room floor. The kind that comes not from winning a battle, but from knowing you no longer have to fight. I walked into the kitchen to find Daniel already up. He was making coffee, the dark roast kind I like. I didn't say anything at first. I just watched him move, carefully, respectfully, like the air had changed, and he was finally breathing it in. He looked up, startled. "Didn't hear you," he said. "Coffee's almost ready." I nodded, sat down. The newspaper was already on the table unopened. The cinnamon I had asked him to buy sat near the sugar, like a small, quiet olive branch. "I signed it," he said, sliding the folded agreement across the table. I didn't touch it, just looked at him. "And do you understand it?" He nodded slowly. "I do now." He took a breath. "Mom, I'm sorry for how far it all got, for letting you feel like a guest in your own home." I looked at him, not with anger, but with something firmer. Resolve, wrapped in grace. "I needed to hear that," I said. "But I also needed to see it, and I have." We sat in silence, while the coffee brewed. For once it wasn't awkward. It was earned. The next week, I started hosting Tuesday dinners. Nothing fancy, just soup, salad, and a loaf of fresh bread. I cooked like I used to, with love in my hands and time on my side. Daniel came every time. Sometimes the kids came too. And slowly, they stopped asking why I looked tired or why I was quiet. They started asking questions about the house, who planted the roses, what room I was born in, why the window near the stairs creaked when the wind hit just right. And I answered, not with bitterness, with memory. The house stopped being a shelter and started being a story again. One evening, after dinner, my granddaughter Chloe lingered behind. She was 13, sharp, curious, and far too observant for her age. As I washed dishes, she stood next to me drying, and said, "Grandma, why did you change all the locks?" I smiled to myself, wiped my hands. "Because," I said softly, "sometimes you have to lock a door to remind people it was yours to open in the first place." She tilted her head, thoughtful. "Is that why you were eating alone for so long?" I paused. Then I turned to her, wiped a stray soap bubble from her elbow. "Yes, sweetheart. Sometimes when people stop seeing you, you have to remind them you're still here." She nodded, quietly, like a young woman learning something she would carry. And that was the moment I knew, even if the adults never fully got it, someone would. Someone was watching, listening, understanding. Later that month, I finally redecorated my room. New curtains, a deep sage green throw blanket, a photo of Mark and me on the nightstand, right beside my reading lamp. I bought myself a new journal, not to write down who wronged me, but to write down what I had reclaimed. Page 1 read, "Today, I took up space, and no one asked me to shrink." Page 2, "I brewed the coffee the way I like it. No one said it was too strong." Page 3, "Chloe asked to help me plant tomatoes in the spring." Not every page was profound. Some just listed groceries, others were blank, but each one felt like breath, like voice, like a gentle thunder no one could silence again. The final Sunday before fall, the whole family came over. Daniel brought dessert. The kids ran around the backyard like they hadn't forgotten what play was. And Sabrina, well, she stayed civil. She brought a pie and didn't raise her voice once. That was enough. After dinner, as everyone was cleaning up, I stepped out onto the porch. The sun was setting behind the pine trees. The sky blushed gold and lavender, and the wind carried the scent of baked apples and warm bread. Daniel came out and stood beside me, not too close, just enough. "You did the right thing," he said after a long pause. Even if it was hard for us. I looked at him, not as my son, as a man. I didn't do it to punish anyone, I said. I did it to stop punishing myself. He looked down. I know. Chloe came out next, holding 2 mugs of tea. She handed me one. It's chamomile, she said, proud. Like you like it. I smiled. Exactly like I like it. She settled on the porch swing, feet barely touching the ground. Daniel looked at me again, like he was seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time in a long while. You okay now? He asked. I sipped the tea, warm and floral, and said, I'm home. And this time, no one laughed. They just listened, and that was enough.